Hello, art historians. Today we are going to work on our unit for early Europe and colonial Americas. So this is sort of a long unit. It will take us through a very long period of time of art. We start in the year 200, and the last work that we do in this unit takes us to the 1700s and the late 1700s. So we're going to do 1500 years of art here. There are a large number of pieces, and because of that, early Europe is broken down into 5 separate PowerPoint presentations. There's just so many pictures and so much to learn. So we're going to start with early Christian. We're going to break this down into several different units. We'll have early Christian, Byzantine, medieval, Islamic, which I know isn't a time period, but it sort of is, and Romanesque. We'll do Gothic. We'll do Northern Renaissance. We'll do Italian Renaissance. We will do Mannerism. We will do Baroque, and then we will do colonial Americas. So it's a long, long unit. So let's get started. The Catacombs of Priscilla. These are from Rome. They are subterranean, under the ground, and they're from what we call the time period, the late antique Europe. And it's because we're sort of at the beginning of early Christian, late antique, so the end of Roman occupation. This is when Christianity is not legal yet. Christianity doesn't become legal until the year 313 with an important piece of information from the Vatican and from various rulers called the Edict of Milan. So when this was begun in 200, Christianity was still illegal. And that's really, really important. So this is an excavated tufa cavern, catacomb, okay? This is in the northern section of Rome. And it is called the Catacombs. We say Priscilla because we've modernized and Englishized her name. But her name would have been pronounced at the time Priscilla. And she lived she was very wealthy. She lived in a large, beautiful villa. And she was the first in her family to become a Christian. And she then converted her family members, and they started a cemetery, a catacomb underneath her house, because the early Christian belief is that in order for, much like the Egyptians, in order for there to be the resurrection, in order for your body to be reunited with your soul in your afterlife, the body needed to remain intact. And that was Christian belief for hundreds and hundreds of years. It wasn't until I think the 60s or the 70s, and maybe even later, I don't have an exact date on that, and I should. It wasn't until then that cremation was allowed in the Catholic Church. So at the time that this was created, early Christian church, which, by the way, until we get to the 1500s, when I say Christian, I mean Catholic. Everybody was Catholic. Everybody who was Christian was Catholic until the 1500s. So if I say Christian, I just want you to think Catholic Church, because that is where we are from Christ to 1500. Everybody who's Christian is Catholic. There's just one faith, Catholicism, if you're Christian. All right. So she becomes Christian. She converts her family. And because the Christian belief is that your body needs to be intact, they dug a catacomb underneath their home. And at first, it was just a place for the burial of her family, just the bodies of her family. But then she welcomed into this underground area more people from the Christian community. And by the time it was done, There were 5 miles of catacomb tunnels. Lots of these narrow passageways that are sort of almost like a labyrinth, like they weave and they go back and forth. And there are all of these, bodies on shelves. It is believed that there are over 400,000 people that were whose bodies were put down here in the catacombs of Priscilla. And so when I go forward a little bit, I'm going to show you this. Okay, so this is not any of your images, but this is a really important image. So when I'm talking about back and forth and through catacombs and around corners, what you see here are little shelves, and they're called loculi, Loculi. And they're little shelves, and these are the shelves on where the bodies go. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the little ones, I'm sorry to be gross, but those are for babies. So we have this storage where the bodies would up and up and up and up. And so this was an area where Christians could put the bodies of the dead until it was legal for Christians to bury their dead in cemeteries. And so even though the Edict of Milan said in 1313 that it was okay to be Christian, people were still very wary of burying their bodies in a cemetery because they were afraid of what the Romans might do. They were afraid of what the pagans might do. They were afraid of what the non-Christians might do. And so this continued to be used until the like early 400s. So what you're looking at here, these loculi, they are the little shelves, and each of these little rooms that you come to, like this is a little room, and then you can see like another little room out there. These little rooms have the same name as some of what we use we saw in our Roman rooms. Those are called cubiculum, like a cubicle, a room, right? A little box. And so the cubiculum, the room, is filled with loculi, the shelves, and then the shelves are filled with the bodies. This is an important art historical place as well, because while this is very hard to see, you can see a tree here. It is meant to reflect the tree of Jesse, which is the lineage for the Virgin Mary, that she is descended from the tree of Jesse. And here you see the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. And this is the oldest, the very first known image of the Virgin Mary. And so that's important because we will see multiple images of the Virgin Mary over the next 1,500 years that we study. And this is the first one. Notice that it takes us until the 200s to start carving places. It takes us until the mid 200s, late 300s to start putting art in these catacombs. So why is there no Christian art before this? Why is there no art of Mary before this one? They think is about between 240 and 250. Why is that? And that is because in Judaism, there is idols are not allowed. You're not allowed to worship an idol. It's part of the second commandment. And so the early Christian religion was struggling with how much of painting the Madonna and Child is being reverent, respecting Mary and baby Jesus, and how much of it is worshiping an idol. And so it took a couple hundred years for them to figure out that it was okay to paint these things as long as we weren't worshiping them. So that is why we see this is why we don't see really Christian art for 250 years after Christ. So we come back here to the images that you're required to know for the College Board for tests and things like that. So this is a piece of the Catacomb of Priscilla called the Greek Chapel. It is not a chapel. It is a place for burial. They didn't have mass here or church services or anything. But why do they call it that? Because there are words written in Greek on the walls, and it just sort of seems to be a small area that's sort of self-contained. There would have been possibly sarcophagi in these little, like our Ludovisi bottle sarcophagus. There might have been a sarcophagi here that had bodies in it. And in this little niche here, that's that word I used before, niche, N-I-C-H-E. So why is it called the Greek chapel? Probably because of this rounded area here and the little rounded areas there that make up the little niches, and the fact that there was Greek lettering on it. They just called it the Greek chapel. Notice that the painting here is fresco. Notice that they plastered this and then they painted it to make it look like marble. They did that sort of fresco technique that we saw in Pompeii in the House of the Veti. They did that underground. So they already have the tufa. Tufa is volcanic rock. So they already have the tufa. It allows them to make the plaster and then the quicklime that then hardens back again to limestone. So that's our fresco here. And we have lots of cool pictures. So this is in that what we often call a Pompeian style, where we have the trompe l'oeil that makes it look like there's these really cool cutouts and stuff like that. And we have pictures. So this is the Greek chapel, not a chapel, but had Greek letters in it. Your second image that you're required to know is the Orant fresco. Okay, so when we're looking at the Orant fresco, we're looking at this person here, who is clearly standing with hands outstretched in prayer. This appears to be a Jewish prayer shawl, and so we see sort of the influence of Judaism on Christianity, because remember, with Jesus being a Jew and his followers all being Jews before they converted to Christianity, the early Christians were first Jewish. And so we see that sort of imagery here. The figure that we see stands, arms outstretched in prayer. Possibly the concept is preaching to the people. We see a person and a child, a baby, and we see children being instructed or taught. So we see sort of like the life of these people. We see a mother and child. We see an old man teaching children, possibly what might have been a rabbi and is now speaking about the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, the Church of Jesus, whatever they were calling it at the time. And with those outstretched arms, we see that we see a distinct separation of the images from the background. We're not dealing with a lot of really great perspective here. We're not dealing with a lot of really amazing detail of like the background and atmosphere, because we're looking based mostly on the figures. And so that is the Orant fresco. And then your other image is this one. This is the Good Shepherd fresco. And so we here see some sheep and a shepherd. And this is in the oldest part of the catacombs. And so we see the sheep and the shepherd. We see that the shepherd is standing in that famous stance that we like, that contrapposto stance. We see, we see a tree with some doves in it. Okay, doves are the symbol of peace. We talk about the fact that shepherds become a very important Christian symbol. And we have early iconography here. The dove is for peace. The sheep is often Christ is often a sheep because he is, he's given up in slaughter and sacrifice. Christ is also called the shepherd because he is the good shepherd and he is, the people are his flock. So that's early Christian iconography. During times of persecution, they may have practiced in this area where Christ was. But what we're really seeing is early decisions on what Christian art would look like. And we begin to see parallels between the Old Testament stories that are the stories of Judaism and the New Testament that are the stories of Christianity. And remember, Christianity accepts everything that is in the Old Testament. And so, we will often see images of Old Testament characters in our early Christian stories. There will be a lot of iconography of Jonah and the whale. There will be a lot of iconography of fish and peacocks, and we will talk more as we get into them. But these are some of the early symbols: sheep, doves, stuff like that. If I go back one. Here's some more doves here and here. Here's a peacock with all the eyes. Peacocks are often considered symbols of eternal life. And so we see these early examples of Christ as a shepherd, people as sheep, and drawing a parallel between stories of the Old Testament and stories of the New Testament. And again, this is a group of people who are figuring out their new religion. We will watch Christian art alter significantly over the next 1,000 years. Okay, that leads us to this building. This is one of the oldest Christian churches in existence. It's Santa Sabina. Again, late antique Europe. It's in Rome. It's right outside the Basilica Maxentius. It's right on the Aventine Hill. It's based on the Basilica Maxentius. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. It's brick and stone. It has a wooden roof. So the brick that you see and the glass windows that you see are actually the original. The roof is not the original. The roof has been replaced multiple times. But for the most part, this is what it would have looked like. So if we're thinking that the Edict of Milan was in 313, this is only 100 years after the Edict of Milan. And the oldest church in Rome doesn't exist anymore. The church that was built just after the Edict of Milan was signed was called Old St. Peter's. It was actually called St. Peter's. We refer to it as Old St. Peter's. It doesn't exist anymore. It was knocked down. And so when Old St. Peter's was knocked down, Santa Sabina becomes the oldest church in Christian history. There are a lot of pagan temples were around on the hills here on the Aventine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. And they took some of the pieces of these temples and used them to create this temple. And so that word that we're going to use, new vocabulary word, is called spolia, Spolia. And spolia is when you go into a building and you steal pieces of it and you use the pieces that you stole to make a new building. And so spolia here is when we get inside and we start looking at the inside of this building, you'll see that some of the columns that were from nearby temples, specifically the Temple of Juno, was a huge pagan temple that was nearby, and paganism was on the way out and Christianity was on the way in. So they went over to the Temple of Juno and they took the columns out of it to use to reinforce the inside of Santa Sabina. This is not an unusual concept. The Greeks did it. The Greeks did it to the Persians. The Romans did it to the Greeks. The Greeks did it to the Egyptians. It's just what people did at this time period. Because why would you build a new column when you could just go to the nearby temple that's not using it and take theirs? And so that was really one of the early ways this was done. Now, what's cool about this is when I open this up into the next thing, you're going to see, hopefully, or you're going to recognize the floor plan a little bit. And so here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the next page. Look at how long it is, 200 feet long, almost 100 feet wide. And it's a big building. And I'm going to go to the floor plan. Okay. So here's your floor plan. And here's some new vocabulary. Here's that spolia, the reused columns. And you can see them here, the columns that are stolen from the local Roman temple to Juno. So here's another vocabulary word. This place where the altar sits, A-L-T-A-R, altar, where the worshiping happens, it sits usually in like a little semicircle. And the place where that altar sits is called an apse, A-P-S-E. AP Art students, you will have to know this. This is vocabulary that you will be required to know. And here we see a coffered ceiling again, where we cut out part of the ceiling to decrease the weight and to decrease the load. So we see the coffered ceiling here, and we see those clear story windows that we learned how to do from the Egyptians. Okay. Now, hopefully when you're looking at this, you see this and you're like, wait, didn't we see a building that had a bunch of columns and a little rounded area at the end? Correct. Except the ones that we are used to seeing have two rounded areas, and those are Roman basilicas. The Roman basilica, like the Basilica Ulpia, where they would have had meetings and trials and legal stuff, what early Christians did was they decided that they needed to decide on a style and what it would look like. And what they did was they pulled the basic concept of a Roman temple. And instead of having rounded sides at both ends, it only has the rounded side at one end so that you can see the altar. So this becomes really important because this is how Catholic Christian churches are constructed for thousands and thousands of years. And it has a lot to do with sort of the early rules of how the church would practice and how the Mass would go. And so there were some basic rules that start off. One of the basic rules is, and you have to know a little bit of Christian faith, Catholic faith, actually specifically Catholic faith, is that during Catholic Mass, when the priest holds up the bread and the wine, the bread stands for Christ's body and the wine stands for Christ's blood. And it's based on a Bible passage where he says, take this and eat it. This is my body. Take this and eat it. This is my blood shed for you. When the priest holds that up and says that, Catholic tradition, and the word is transubstantiation. You don't really need to know it, but you kind of need to know about the concept. Catholic tradition says that when the priest holds those two up and says the prayer, the bread and the wine transubstantiate. They change their substance, trans to change, substance. They change their substance from being bread and wine into being body and blood. They don't look any different. They don't taste any different, but they have transubstantiated and into the body and blood of Christ. And because this is such an important piece of Catholic Christian ritual, churches are set up so that all people in the church have a view of the altar. That is one of the early tenets, TENETS, early rules of Catholic construction. Everyone in the building has to have a view of the altar. Okay. And that is super important. And that is why they adopted this Roman basilica format, because now you see all of these people. Okay. What's awesome is that the men would gather here in the center and the women would gather here on the sides, indicative of how it was celebrated in the Jewish faith as well. But women were allowed a full unobstructed view. So we have practicing faith together, but slightly separated. Also, early Christian Catholic tradition says that buildings, Catholic Christian buildings, should be plain on the outside. And any part that's beautiful, any decoration, should be on the inside, because that is like a metaphor for humans, that it doesn't matter really what our outside is. What matters is what is inside us, our soul, our beliefs, our kindness, whatever. That is then translated by early Christians into construction of early Christian churches. So Santa Sabina is not terribly beautiful on the outside, but she's really important, the church. I say she. Santa Sabina was an early martyr to the faith. She practiced Christianity. She was told to give it up and go back to practicing pagan religion. She refused. They wanted her to to marry a pagan. She refused, and so she was killed. But she owned this land. And when she was killed, she donated this land to have this church built on it. And so that's why this church is such a big deal. It's the oldest existent Christian church. And it really shows us how early churches were constructed. So let's go back inside. And this is how you see that apse again, the side aisles, the spolia that was stolen from the Temple of Juno. Okay. Your theme here, just religious spaces. Super easy. Okay. And we're going to go one more. These are also the first example of a depiction of the crucifixion. The doors are from the 5th century, so 400s, right? So there's sometime between 400 and 490, they believe. And so the late 5th century. And you're really looking at the very first depiction of the crucifixion. This is the earliest picture of Christ and the thieves being crucified that exists in art anywhere. And that is because look how old this building is. This building is 100 years after Christianity is legalized. They're still deciding what they want their pictures to look like. They're still figuring out what they want their Christian iconography to be. And here we see the first, takes them 150 to almost 200 years to put it together someplace so that you can see it. When you come inside, you see these beautiful markings above the columns. And this area where they're written here, it's called a spandrel, S-P-A-N-D-R-E-L, D-R-E-L, yeah, spandrel. And here you see a chalice, the cup that is the blood of Christ, and then the host that is the body of Christ. So you see, we're beginning again, early iconography. We steal these beautiful Corinthian columns, but then we make this beautiful art above it of the chalice and the bread. And so here we begin to see iconography that becomes a part of and remains a part of Catholic Christian tradition today. The bread and the wine, the host, the crucifixion of Christ. These are all images that are normal in a Catholic church. But here's where we see them begin them. Remember how I said these windows are original? The windows are made of selenite, S-E-L-E-N-I-T-E. You probably don't need to know that, but selenite is like a thin rock, and it can be kind of carved in sheets and put up there. So it looks like it's glass, but it's not. It's actually super thin selenite that's sort of been shaved to allow light in. It's more durable, it lasts longer, it still allows light in, and we didn't have to worry about making glass, which when we wanted all of this light in there, making that much glass would have been difficult. And so it's an early way to get sort of the light in that they want without having to make lots of glass. So when we think about early churches, we really need to always think about this building. This really is the best example we have of what the early church looked like. And it's remarkable because so much of it remains intact. So much, the glass, the selenite glass, the mosaics, the doors, so much of it over, thousands of years has, stayed intact, and it's beautiful. And so we're lucky that we're able to see how the Roman Basilica influenced the construction of churches for Christians in the 400s and all the way up through to today. That is still a rule in Catholic churches, that every person in the congregation must have an unobstructed view of the altar. And so with that concept, they borrowed the Roman Basilica, they stole Roman, columns. So, and so it starts with taking things that were already there and mixing them in. And that's important because it helps to show us where the early images and the early construction started from. Okay, moving forward. Now we're in the Byzantine area. or the Byzantine era, okay, and Byzantine Europe. And so this is what we need to think about. The Byzantine Empire is all of this down in through here, okay? Constantinople, Antioch, all of that stuff, okay? And this becomes really important. Constantine, right? Constantinople, Byzantine Empire. They later expand down into here as well, and we'll talk about that. But the most important part is like this, the Byzantine Empire, and under Constantine and stuff like that. All right, so that's where we are. I like to give you a minute to figure out where all these things are, okay? Persian Empire is hiding over here. And the Byzantine Empire takes over Rome. That's who defeats Rome. That's what the fall of Rome is all about. It takes over Rome, takes over Greece, okay? It takes over Egypt. So all of the civilizations that we had studied in our ancient Mediterranean, most of them are then folded into the Byzantine Empire. So our first image in the Byzantine Empire is the Vienna Genesis. Vienna meaning where it is, and Genesis meaning the book of the Bible, the very first book of the Bible, the very first book of the Old Testament, if you're doing like just Jewish stories, or the very first book of the entire Bible if we're talking Old Testament and New Testament. And it's important that you remember that Jews and Christians share a written text up until the New Testament starts. Both Jews and Christians use everything that's in the Old Testament. Once the New Testament starts and we get the stories of Christ, they veer off. And that's an important distinction. Actually, Islam and Christianity and Judaism all use the same text. Islam breaks off at the break between Abraham and Isaac, and then Christianity breaks off with Christ. But it's really important that we realize that the three major religions all start with the same text. So here we're looking at the book of Genesis that is in, it's called Vienna Genesis because that's where it is, where it exists, where it was moved to. So there you go. It is the early Byzantine Empire. So the early 6th century, which means the 500s, okay? And it's called an illuminated manuscript. And so what we have to understand about manuscript is the word manuscript means script, written, manu, meaning by hand. So a manuscript is any text that is written by hand, okay? Illuminated means that it is decorated with pictures, and usually either gold or silver or something that will sparkle when you have candlelight. Okay, so it's hard to see the beauty of these because what you can't really see right now because it looks orange is that vellum would have been dyed purple and it would have been stunning. But as the vellum has aged, it is changing color and it appears more orange. Purple is the color of royalty. Purple was a difficult color to create. Purple was an expensive color to create. And so we know that this was an important manuscript. It is actually the oldest surviving illustrated Bible text. The oldest surviving illustrated Bible text. Not the oldest Bible text, but it's the oldest one that has pictures that exist in the world. So what we're looking at is biblical instruction that tries to teach both through words. This is written in Greek, by the way. Early manuscripts were either in Greek or Latin. So this is written in Greek. It would have been incredibly expensive to make. It is considered probably the most important early manuscript that exists. There are only 24 pages left, which gives you 48 illustrations. because it's a page is one sheet with an illustration on each side. There were, they believe, 192 illustrations. So it's a very small piece that we have left. Why is that? Well, let's start with, in the 6th century, very few books were written. It is a huge undertaking, especially if you're going to write out books of the Bible. You had to make them out of animal skins. So, it's like you're making leather, but you're making paper. It would have required a large investment of time. And it would have required specific skills. And multiple people with specific skills would have taken, people to make the paper, and people to do the writing, and then people to do the illustrations, and then people to do the binding, and people, like, it's a huge undertaking. And so it would have been incredibly expensive. We don't know who made it or why it was made. We do know that there's a lot of really cool stuff that's going on here. We think it might have been made in Constantinople or Antioch, both of those down in that Byzantine area. We know that it's written in Greek, so that sort of helps us narrow. We see that the fluid movements of the Greek helps to identify where it might have been created. We see that the characters are in contrapposto, so that's important. That becomes a convention. We're moving away from this weird, early Greek archaic standing. We still have contrapposto here. So the text that you see that is black would have been silver. And silver oxidizes. It turns black with age. If you ever have a piece of really good, nice silver jewelry, you know that. So this is oxidized and turned black. So it's really hard to see how beautiful it would have been. And so it would have been terribly expensive, and it would have been terribly time and cost. It would have been, a big undertaking. There was what we call an early doctor of the church. St. Jerome believed that this was an extravagance, and that we shouldn't have books like this. And so, even as we're here in the 500s, we're still arguing about whether this is worshiping icons, or if this is okay, whether we should spend our money and our time decorating the words of the Bible, or whether we should just have books that have the words of the Bible in them. So it's something that the early Christian faith will struggle with for hundreds of years. There's actually a huge thing that happens in the 800s called the iconoclast, where hundreds of thousands of works that are illustrated and have pictures of saints and holy figures are all destroyed. So it's something that we worked on, figuring out how what became our iconography and how we got there, so that we will keep looking at that. So I'm going to go into specific pages here. This page is the page from Genesis 32, verses 22 through 31. And for those of you who want to look it up, it is the story of Jacob, who has all these children, and he leads all of his children. He's leading his children across the river, across this bridge. And as he's walking, he meets this man, and he gets into a fight with this man. They get into a little wrestle there. And at the end, we find out that actually that man that he meets and wrestles with is actually not a man, it's an angel. And that angel has brought a blessing to Jacob from God. And after that, Jacob is called Israel. And so that is the rough story of what we see here. But let's go to a close-up of it. And when we look at a close-up of it, we see some really cool stuff. Okay, here's one of the women. Here's another one of the women on the horse. We see, the sons, and we see them walking. And look at that. We're trying to show the story and a passage of time. We come across this bridge, and I love how the bridge looks Roman, because that's what bridges look like. We see the back of her. This is very unusual in art to see the back of someone. This is kind of a big deal. And then we see Jacob here, and then Jacob wrestling with the angel. and then the angel blessing Jacob, and then all of them leaving. Okay, and it's interesting in that we see contrapposto, we see interesting body shapes, we see an attempt to show movement, we see an attempt to show passage of time. We have a story that's being told, even though we have a limited amount of space to do it in. But that's, how we tell the story here. The next page is the page of Rebecca at the well. And this is the story of Abraham, who wants to get a wife for his son Isaac. And down at the well, he's praying to God, and then his servant Eliezer prays to God that God will bring a wife for Isaac. And Eliezer is down at the well, and he's praying that God will bring a wife for Isaac. And as he's doing that, Rebecca approaches the well, and here we see that trying to show movement. Here's Rebecca. And then here she is again. We're trying to show the story moving along. This is the Roman goddess of water, who personifies spring. So what's interesting is you're getting Roman influence, right, in their stories, in their architecture, in their construction. I mean, look at the Roman town, guys. But it's an ancient story, and we're trying to show it in a way that will make sense. So here is Rebecca walking up to the well. Here is the spring, and here then is Rebecca gathering water at the well. And this is Genesis 24, verses 15 through 61, and eventually Rebecca does in fact become the wife of Isaac. And so we see that that early church documents trying to show some of the early Bible stories. I love the camels. They're very funny looking. They look a little bit like a cross between, I don't even know, a snake, a camel, and a dragon. I love the background of the almost like a medieval town. This is not what it would have looked like during the Bible time, but this is what it looked like at the time that this text was created. Also in this picture, you can really see sort of the purplishness of the vellum. It doesn't look quite so orange, and it's really quite beautiful. All right, so that's it for Byzantine right now. We're still in our Byzantine Empire. We're going to finish that for today, and we'll pick up with more Byzantine next time. All right, thanks, guys. See you again soon.